If you're in a certain set of conditions and circumstances that lead you towards being evil, does that really make you evil? Thinking about the contrast between the road and Blood Meridian, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with the road, and maybe a lot of you are familiar with Blood Meridian also. The Road is certainly McCarthy's most popular novel. It's the one that won him the Pulitzer Prize. Many people regard Blood Meridian, critics and a lot of people who are like big Cormac McCarthy fans tend to regard Blood Meridian as his magnum opus. And I was realizing that there are some similarities between the two novels, but I wanted to sort of contrast them in a way that I thought was very interesting and I think might be enlightening. So I wanted to share it with you. So the thing that these two books have in common in my view is, well, first of all, before I start talking about the books, I want to explain what the motivation is here. So in my view, literature is really an experience. There's bits of wisdom that you can acquire from literature, and there's all sorts of other good things. But I think, for me at least, me personally, I think what literature does best is give you an experience like no other, an experience that you cannot have anywhere else. In particular, something that occurs inside your imagination. Your emotions can get working, and you can fill in the gaps with things that you see, and you can learn lessons very personal to yourself because you can connect yourself to the book, and so you can have a personal, interwoven experience with the book. And in that sense, me reading a book is not the same as you reading a book. But, of course, there are commonalities that we can obviously get similar sorts of experiences and messages from books. And I want to talk about The Road and Blood Meridian through that lens. So first of all, The Road. Most of you probably know The Road. You probably know the premise of The Road if you have not read it. Maybe you've seen the movie, but I think most people know how The Road is infamously one of the darkest, most depressing books ever. Probably the most dark and depressing book. And I won't spend too much time on The Road, but that's basically what the experience of The Road is. It's dark, it's depressing, and you cannot really get that experience anywhere else. So it's not really a pleasant experience necessarily, but it is a very meaningful experience. And it's one that you really cannot get out of life unless you intentionally put yourself in extreme circumstances where you may or may not survive. Because you really cannot get that experience in life unless you actually put yourself in a position where you can believe that your life is in danger and that there's actually no hope. You would need to go to Antarctica and hike like 20 miles in and then actually be at risk of dying. Like, I don't even know how you would set that situation up. If you wanted to actually have that experience and undergo that and become a better person through that experience, it's nearly impossible unless you have this book, which enables you to do that. And like I said, that's what's so special about literature, is it enables you to have these subjective experiences inside your imagination. And if you can immerse yourself strongly enough in the book, you can actually trick yourself into thinking that you've had that experience. That's why I'm very, passionate about finding very quiet places to read and taking the ritual of it very seriously, because having these experiences is what literature is all about. So anyways, like I said, I'm not going to go too deep into The Road because it's, that's a fairly simple premise. It's just very dark, depressing, hopeless, sort of analogous to purgatory, you might say. So The Road sort of represents the purgatory sort of suffering, and that kind of suffering is, to be found in our lives, I think, namely people in like America and like the developed world at least, in a sort of depression because your life is meaningless and you don't really have hope for a future. And there's a whole slew of reasons, and I'm not getting into that in this video because this video is about Cormac, our boy Cormac. So yes, The Road is purgatory. Purgatory is like sort of depression, and that's what I'll sort of describe as one end of the pole of suffering. And on the other end of the pole of suffering is sort of the heart of human evil, is what I'll describe it as. And this, in my view, is really what Blood Meridian is all about. And Blood Meridian, I'll describe it a little bit since many people probably don't know Blood Meridian, as well as The Road at least. Blood Meridian, if you don't know, is dark, yes, but dark in a different way than The Road is dark. The Road is bleak and hopeless, and the world is covered in ash, and there's no sunlight or anything. But Blood Meridian is about suffering inflicted by other humans. It's about the true heart of evil and where evil comes from. Basically, the novel is about scalp hunters. And yes, this is going to contain spoilers. I've said this before, you cannot spoil literature, but if you really don't want me to tell you what happens in the book, I'm not saying it's a spoiler, because you cannot spoil literature. But if you do not want to know what happens, I'm not going to give away everything, but if you do not want to know what happens, just click off the video. Go away. Bye-bye. Go read the book and then come back and watch. Bye-bye. See you later. Basically, the book is about scalp hunters during the 1850s. And so a bit of a history lesson here. Scalp hunters were commissioned by the Mexican government in the 1850s to hunt and kill and scalp, that's where the name blood meridian comes from, because it's a meridian of blood on the head where the scalp has been taken. The Mexican government commissioned people to go kill Indians and take their scalps, and they paid people based on how many scalps they collected. So we're following a gang, which is a partially historically accurate gang. It's called the Glanton Gang. Glanton was a real person. Look it up if you're interested. The Glanton Gang goes out and kills Apaches commissioned by the Mexican government. And what we see is the slow and steady descent into true evil, like the purest form of evil you can imagine. And I will acknowledge there is a sort of sadistic kind of evil, one where you actually get pleasure out of inflicting harm on others, and this is a different kind of evil. This is, arguably a little even more scary kind of evil. This is a sort of evil where you're just doing it to get a paycheck. This novel reminds me a lot of Eichmann in Jerusalem by Hannah Arendt, where she discusses the concept of the banality of evil. It's a very famous concept. I recommend you look it up just briefly. You don't have to read the entire book, but just the topic, the concept of the banality of evil is very thought-provoking and important to understand. Another thing where it comes up is the Milgram experiment, the shock experiment, where people basically were willing to torture other people. It's an experiment where people were led to believe that they were torturing people, and they were okay with it just because some guy in a white lab coat told them it was okay, like turn up the shock, and then they heard somebody screaming, and the white lab coat guy goes turn up even further, and the people turn it up, not knowing that they are actually the person that is the subject of the experiment, not the person in the other room that's screaming. But anyways, the Milgram shock experiment is another excellent example of the banality of evil. But in Blood Meridian, what happens in Blood Meridian? Well, at first, the Glanton Gang goes and does their job. They go and kill the Apache Indians, and they collect the scalps, and you can argue that's evil. You could also argue that they're just doing their job, that they've been commissioned to do so, and it's the Wild West, and it's a crazy place, and things like this happen. It's chaos, it's absolute insanity, and there's at least some argument to be made that these guys aren't assholes. And an important detail is that you are there with them as the reader. You accompany these guys who are actually the protagonists of the novel. Even though these are some of the most bloodthirsty, evil men you can imagine, you are accompanying them on their journey. So they kill hundreds of Apache, women, children, and importantly, they also kill some Mexican slaves. The Mexican slaves, they scalp because they are the same color skin as the Apache Indians. They're dead anyways. It's just a little bit of extra money. Nobody's harmed really. But the fact that they kill the Mexican slaves and take the scalps and get paid for them opens up a sort of Pandora's box, if you know where this is going. And so it's a very gentle and steady sort of progression, even though where they're starting off is fairly awful, I will say. And another important thing to point out is that you're watching this through the eyes of the kid, and the kid is 14 years old. He's this boy who ran away from home, and he's out in the Wild West, and he's struggling to find food to survive. And, he's just completely desperate for his own survival. And it's from that point of desperation that leads him to joining the gang and sort of being okay with doing this because he knows he needs to do this to survive. Would you do it if you were gonna die and starve if you didn't take this job? So yeah, we saw it in the shock experiment. We saw it we saw it during World War II. That's the topic of the banality of evil, because these people are not necessarily inherently evil people. That's not to say that there aren't some people who are sadistically evil, who actually take pleasure in harming others and really want to harm others, and it's like something inside of them that's their problem, that they want to go and do that. But there's another form of evil, which is the one that we're discussing here, which is that if you're in a certain set of conditions and circumstances that lead you towards being evil, does that really make you evil? It's a hard question to ask. When your own survival is on the line and you can either engage in this horrendous evil or die, are you really an evil person for taking that choice? Maybe weak, you could say it's a weak person, maybe, because they're afraid of their own death. But I mean, there's a million different ways you could take this, and that's another thing that literature is really good for, is helping you explore these questions and these possibilities. Because we start off, they're just doing their job as they're supposed to. They are killing the Apache. Yes, they're killing women and children, but they're doing what they were hired to do. So there's at least some sort of justification for what they're doing. But like I said, it progresses steadier into a more potent form of evil. The next thing that we see them do, they move on to killing different tribes of Indians, in particular the Tiguas. And the Tiguas are a peaceful tribe of Indians. And the feeling that you get from this novel, and again, I'm talking about my own personal experience of the novel, because like I said, I think that is really what literature is good for here. My experience of the novel was that I was being pulled along with this gang committing these atrocities, and it's like a part of me wants to resist doing it, but another part of me is just giving in. It's not even really giving in, it's just accepting, but not even really accepting. It's more just like not doing anything while the wave carries you, and you're just there and you're going along, and somebody clubs down an old man, so that means you club down an old man, and you're moving with the force of a group. And if you're a part of the group, that means, you know, you're justified in acting the way that the group acts, and groupthink takes over. And that's what the banality of evil is, and it's so perfectly captured in this novel. So it's for me, it was very psychological in a way, reading this novel. And eventually what we get to is the point where this gang of outlaws, they've become just brutal outlaws. They just walk into a village, not even a Native American village, a Mexican village. It's the people they were hired to protect from the Apache, and they just slaughter the entire village of Mexicans. They take the scalps, and the Mexican government pays for the scalps of their own citizens. It's very disturbing. It's a very disturbing thing to read and be a participant of. Because like I said, if you want to have a real experience, you can use your imagination with these things, and you can put yourself there with the gang. You know, you're doing this. That's what a story is all about. You know, it's identifying with the protagonist. And what it comes to is just this absolute evil that you're participating in. And I think it's analogous to hell, honestly. I think, you know, Blood Meridian is an incredible title. The subtitle is really powerful for some reason. It's called The Evening Redness in the West. And I'm not exactly sure why, but that's really the power of word right there, is that something can evoke a feeling with not really you knowing, understand why it invokes that feeling. But the evening redness in the West just has such a feel to it. It invokes the feeling of hell, for me at least. And that, of course, is what I sort of feel represents the other side of the polarity of human suffering, is hell. Hell on one side, purgatory on the other. And I thought it was interesting, and I wanted to share it with you. That's all.